Today we'll take a look at 50 facts about the clone army of the Star Wars galaxy, with facts about the clones, clone units, weaponry, clone special forces, and more. Enjoy! The clones were commissioned by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas for the Republic from the Kaminoans. The Mandalorian bounty hunter Jango Fett was chosen as the genetic donor. Like their donor, all clones are 1 meters 83 centimeters tall. The first real battle in which the clones were used was the Battle of Geonosis. Since the clones had only gained combat experience through training, this first battle of the Clone Wars was also one of the bloodiest. Legend sources state that at least 192,000 clones and 10,000 clone commandos were deployed in this battle. Tens of thousands of these clones never returned from the battlefield, and thousands more were seriously wounded. Regular clone troopers who survived the battles wore a total of 3 different sets of armor: Phase 1 clone armor, Phase 2 armor, and for a short time, Stormtrooper armor. During the Clone Wars, the clones switched from Phase 1 armor to Phase 2 armor because the Phase 1 armor did not fit well and became very uncomfortable after prolonged wear. At the same time, the Phase 2 armor was reinforced, providing the clones with even more protection. In the first phase of this armor, there were certain colors that indicated certain ranks. Green represented the rank of Sergeant, blue, Lieutenant, red, Captain, and yellow, Commander. Starting with Phase 2 armor, this principle was changed. Here, the colors no longer represented ranks, but affiliation with certain units. The dark blue, for example, represented the 501st Legion. While any customization by the clones was prohibited with Phase 1 armor, they were allowed to design their Phase 2 armor to a certain extent. This ranged from their own paint schemes to the equipment they used. The regular clone troopers had certain standard blasters, from which they could choose depending on the situation. These included the DC-15A, designed for medium to long range, and the DC-15S, designed for shorter ranges. In addition to the standard infantry clone troopers, there were also several other specialized units. These included the Republic Commandos and the ARC Troopers. The ARC Troopers were trained more as loners, to complete their missions alone without any additional support. The Republic Commandos, on the other hand, were always trained in teams of 4. Since the Mandalorian bounty hunter Jango Fett was the donor of the clones' DNA, he was also responsible for a large part of their training. But since Jango alone couldn't train millions of beings, several additional so-called Kui Valdar were hired in Legends to train the clones. These Kui Valdar were Mandalorians who had been excluded from their culture for whatever reason. This piece of equipment, which some clones wore on their helmets, was a rangefinder. This could be folded down over their eyes, allowing a clone to determine the exact distance to their target. The ships and vehicles used by the clones in the Clone Wars were secretly manufactured by Rothana Heavy Engineering before the Clone Wars, a subsidiary company of Kuat Drive Yards, which later also manufactured the Empire's Star Destroyers. Rothana had only been discovered a few centuries earlier and was so isolated that it could easily be cut off from the rest of the galaxy for this secret construction. Each clone was given certain identifiers from birth. They only received their names later from their trainers or brothers. For example, Captain Rex's identifier was CT-7567 and Commander Cody's was CC-2224. These identifiers also had certain meanings. CT stood for Clone Trooper, CC for Clone Commander, RC for Republic Commando, and A for ARC. The abbreviation ARC, by the way, stands for Advanced Recon Commando. These ARC troopers were also bred differently from all other clones from the very beginning. While the standard clones were equipped with genes that made them obey orders, the ARCs were given genes that allowed them to act and to think independently. This, of course, helped them when they had to operate alone behind enemy lines and react to new situations for which their orders hadn't prepared them. That's why the ARCs were granted the right to customize their own armor and equipment early on, long before any other clones were allowed to do so. Episode 2 mentions 200,000 clone units that have been completed and another million that will be completed shortly. That would put the total number of clones at 1.2 million. Quite low considering the size of the galaxy. Other sources later speak of 3 million clones. Canon circumvents this by assuming that these 1.2 million clones were only produced in Tipoca City, the city where Obi-Wan lands in Episode 2, and that several million more were bred in dozens of other cities across Kamino. Legends offers a different explanation for how the Republic later acquired more clones. It is explained there that Palpatine secretly used the new Sparti clone technology, a technology that was discovered decades later in Legends by Grand Admiral Thrawn in a secret hideout of Palpatine's on the planet Wayland. With this new technology, humans could be cloned and bred within a few months instead of 9 years. The disadvantage? These clones were unstable and nowhere near as good as the Kamino clones. It was described that these clones forgot their opponents when they were out of sight, and that these clones were no better with their blasters than the Separatists' B-1 battle droids. In order to raise the Kamino clones within 9 years, they were given genes that doubled their aging rate. This not only meant that they grew up twice as fast, but also that they would die twice as fast if they survived the war. Thus, their life expectancy, if they survived the battles, was only about 35 years. A clone trainer, Kal Skirata, disagreed with the way the Kaminoans and the Republic treated the clones like property. He considered his clones like his children, which is why Kal founded a cell of clones during the Clone Wars, which settled on the moon of Mandalore, and attempted to secure better rights for the clones and find a way to stop this double aging process. In both Legends and canon, the clones continued to work for their regime even after the Republic transformed into the Empire. In canon, these clones were replaced relatively quickly with normal beings. In Legends, this process took several years. In Legends, the main reason why clones weren't allowed to continue fighting for the Empire were that the Empire was afraid of a biological attack that could maybe only target the clones' genes. That some Kaminoans had bred clones of Jango Fett for themselves to rebel against the Empire, and that the Empire wanted to further indoctrinate its own citizens, making it much easier if many of those citizens fought for the Empire as their own soldiers. However, in canon, there were also some clones for a long time who only worked in a single unit in the Empire, the Purge Troopers. These clones were the last of their kind. Since the Empire no longer wanted them, they were chosen for one of the most dangerous jobs in the Empire: hunting Jedi. If the Purge Troopers were successful, the Empire won because there would be one fewer Jedi. If those Purge Troopers were unsuccessful, the Empire also won because there would be one fewer clone. Since the clones descended from a Mandalorian donor and were also trained by Mandi Mandalorian instructors, their armor was also designed based on Mandalorian designs. During the time they were creating the Jango Fett clones, the Kaminoans also bred two very special clones, clones X1 and X2. The clones X1 and X2 were created from the DNA of a Jedi. Both clones fought in the Clone Wars, one of them joined later the Rebellion, the other the Empire. Before they were real ARC troopers, there were the so-called Null Arcs in Legends. These were the Kaminoans' first attempt to create clones from Jango Fett's genetic material. In this first attempt, 5 clones were created that were too independent and thought too much for themselves, so they should actually be destroyed. However, their lives were saved by instructor Kal Skirata, who later adopted them all as his sons. The next clones the Kaminoans bred were 100, who could also think for themselves, but not to the dangerous extent that the Null Arcs could. These 100 clones were then called Alpha Arcs and trained by Jango Fett personally. Only after these 100 Arcs had successfully been cloned, the actual breeding of the clone army began. In addition to the ARC Troopers and the Republic Commandos, there were several other specialized clone troops. These included, among other troops, the Covert Ops clones. If you've made it this far in the video and liked the video, please subscribe to see more 50 Facts videos about the Star Wars universe and armies coming soon here on the channel. These skirts that some clones wear are called Kamas. The clones wore them not only because they thought they were stylish, but also because they had a good use. They provided good protection against flying shrapnel that would otherwise have torn off their legs, and they helped clones using jetpacks protect their legs from jetpack fire. Normal clone units were divided into different unit sizes. The smallest unit was a squad with a total of 9 troopers, led by a sergeant. The largest unit was the Grand Army, consisting of a total of 10 system armies, totaling 3 million clones. In between there was the platoon consisting of 4 squads, led by a lieutenant, and the company consisting of 4 platoons, led by a captain. While all clones were formally subordinate to their Jedi generals, ultimately they answered only to the Supreme Commander, who in the case of the Republic was the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, Palpatine. Over the course of the war, there were not only ARC Troopers who were bred from birth to be ARCs. As the war progressed, some ARCs died, while other normal clone troopers were able to prove themselves on the battlefield. The best of these could then be retrained as ARC Troopers. There was another experimental special unit of the Republic's Grand Army, the Bad Batch. This consisted of 4 clones whose DNA was completely altered. Therefore, each of these 4 clones looked different and had different abilities. This Bad Batch consisted of the leader Hunter, the sniper Crosshair, the technician Tech, and the muscleman Wrecker. In Legends, there were also specially designated clones who were trained from birth to fight against Jedi. These were called Clone Assassins and were secretly commissioned by Chancellor Palpatine himself. They were armed with 2 vibroblades, which they used against the Jedi during the Great Jedi Purge. There was a clone commando, Darman Skirata, who had a relationship with the Jedi Etain Turmukan, with whom he eventually fathered a child. In addition to their weapons, the clone troopers also carried a considerable amount of equipment. This usually included at least one type of grenade, a medkit containing synth meat and Bacta, and various multitools. While they carried most of their equipment on their belts, at the front and sides, the grenades were carried on their backs in a cylindrical container. While normal clones wore Phase 1 and Phase 2 armor, the Republic Commandos had their own armor, the Clone Katarn armor. This was equipped with, among other things, a personal shield, night vision, and a retractable blade in the wrist. There were some clones who defied Order 66. In Legends, this is explained by the fact that some clones were strong-willed enough to disobey their orders. In canon, it was the inhibitor chips that some clones removed or got removed, thus exempting them from following Order 66. The clones of the 501st, who served under Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars, continued to serve in the Empire under Darth Vader. Thus, the 501st earned the nickname Vader's Fist. After the Clone Wars, there were several more attempts to establish new clone armies. Some were successful, like Thrawn with his party clones. Others, like X-1, who attempted to create a clone army from Luke Skywalker's genetic material, were less successful. This type of fin on the helmets of the Phase 1 armor actually had two functions. Firstly, it could absorb some of the impact of heavy objects. It could catch and absorb debris or shrapnel before it hit the rest of the helmet, perhaps even breaking it into smaller pieces. Secondly, it also contained an antenna for the clones' comm device, which allowed them to maintain contact with other clones and their commander. The clones' complete Phase 1 armor weighed just under 40 kilograms. In the films, the clones were played and voiced by Temuera Morrison, who also played their DNA donor Jango Fett. In the Clone Wars, the task was then taken over by the voiceover legend D. Bradley Baker. The clone armor in the prequels were no real costumes. The clones in the movies who fight the battle droids were all computer generated. Only the flashback scenes in the Ahsoka series showed clones with costumes as armor. If you liked the video, please subscribe and keep an eye out for a 50 fact video about the Battle Droid army, which I'll be posting soon. Have a great day and may the Force be with you.